Howdy, I'm Dan Bullock, the designer of The Gods Will Have Blood. I'm going to show you how to play this game. It's a solitaire game. Players are going to be taking on the role of Everest Gamlin from Anatole France's novel, The Gods Will Have Blood. During the course of this game, you are going to be hearing cases against accused people by the Revolutionary Tribunal. Those folks are each represented by a card in this deck, which we will refer to as the accused deck. The game comes with a total of 36 cards. 3 cards are blue, and the remaining 33 cards are all red. Every game will include all 3 blue cards, and then you will take a random sampling of 21 cards of the other red accused deck cards and shuffle them all together to have your create your starting accused deck. So, the object of the game, you are going to hear all of these cases, so that means play through this entire deck if you survive long enough, and you want to have your reputation, Jacobin reputation, is marked by this red pawn here, residing in this top spot on this track here, marked with a little white asterisk, and you want it in this space at the end of the game. If this pawn is anywhere except this space, you will lose. If during the course of the game either your Jacobin reputation, marked by this red pawn, or the court legitimacy, marked by this black pawn, ever end up at the bottom of this track in the spaces marked with a guillotine, you will also lose. And the final way you can lose the game is at the start of every game, we have a draw pool marked by this little blue bag that contains 7 little wooden cubes. 3 of them are white, 4 of them are red. The white cubes are the court's capacity to exonerate someone or find them not guilty. And the red cubes are the likelihood, or basically the will of the court to condemn people and find them guilty. If during the course of the game you run out of white cubes at any point, you will also lose. So there's all the ways to lose the game. But how do you play? So, to start, let me just go over some of the components. We've already discussed these cards, but I'm going to show you an example from a card that is not going to be used in this game. So the front side of every single card has a person on it, and then it'll have a little description of who this person is, what the charges are being brought against this individual, and the evidence being provided to the court. On the reverse side will be what will happen to our reputation, the court's legitimacy, and momentum if that individual is found guilty at the top, marked with a guillotine, or if they're found innocent, marked with the little scale or balance at the bottom. So, we do not look at the reverse side of a card when we are hearing a case. We only read the front face with the text. And then once we've read the text, then we will proceed with determining our verdict and then draw from the judgment pool, which is the blue bag. We will draw up to 2 cubes to determine whether or not that individual is found guilty or innocent. More on that in a moment. But I want to go over the other components of this board. So we talked about the Jacobin reputation and court legitimacy, both of which have these starting spaces at the beginning of the game. You'll always put your legitimacy pawn on the L marked on this vine, and you will always place the red reputation pawn over the R, also marked on the vine. At the top of the court legitimacy track, you'll also see that there's a blue cube. That is a wild token. If at any point your legitimacy moves up to the top of the track, you will remove the blue cube from the vine and place it in the judgment pool. At that point, anytime a player draws that cube, it can be used as if it was a white or a red cube, and it's the player's choice. Basically, a legitimate court is one that can be persuaded by the members of the tribunal. Now, another interesting wrinkle about this vine over on the left side of the board is each side has is marked with a color. So the black pawn travels along any of the spaces marked with black. The red pawn travels along any of the spaces marked with red. For the 3 that are in the center, they can have either of these pawns occupying it. However, there's only 1 pawn allowed in each space. So if we are ever instructed to move, say, this red pawn up a space, but it is blocked by the presence of the black pawn, then we would simply leave the pawn in place. However, if in a circumstance we are asked to lower a pawn one space on a given track and that space is occupied, you will lower it one additional space to the next unoccupied space. So there's only one pawn per space under all circumstances. And the final part of the board I want to show you is momentum. So in the upper right corner, you'll see that there is a box containing 7 red cubes. Anytime we're instructed by a card, like say this one here, on the back, if we were to find this individual guilty, it says add momentum and then raise reputation 1 space. So when we add momentum, it means pulling a cube from this box and adding it to the judgment pool. So as we add momentum to the bag, it will make guilty sentences more likely. If at any point during the game this box is completely emptied of red cubes, then we're going to divide the accused deck into 2 equal stacks, and we will begin reading cards 2 at a time. Basically, we'll be hearing 2 cases at the same time, but we will only be applying 1 verdict or judgment to both cards. More on that in a moment. So, what do you do on your turn? Well, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to look at the card at the top of the accused deck and read the text prompt. So this card, for example, is for Pierre Vernon. Citoyen Vernon is accused of conspiring with General Dumouriez to attempt a coup and for inciting the nation to civil war. This trial will be kept brief. Mr. Vernon is an adept attorney, and we will not let him needlessly draw out proceedings and make a mockery of our court. So from this card, we can probably deduce that there is reason to suspect that these proceedings are not entirely legitimate because he is an attorney and we are not letting him adequately represent himself. And even though we know the charges are for attempting a coup and inciting a riot, we don't really get too much description on any evidence being brought against him. So from that, we're supposed to deduce whether or not it would be beneficial to our reputation to find him guilty or innocent, and whether or not it would harm the court's legitimacy if we were to do either of those things. Now, at the start of the game, our reputation is very low, so we may want to just take the chance and see if we can try to find him guilty in the hopes that it will boost our esteem with the court. So to do this, first thing we do is decide whether we find the accused guilty or innocent. So our personal verdict in this case will be that he is guilty. However, in order to carry out that sentence, we will need to draw at least 1 red cube from this bag, and you may draw up to 2. So I'm going to draw 1 at a time, but I'm hoping to get a red cube from this bag. My first cube draw is white, so right now I don't have enough to carry out that sentence, but I may draw a second cube to carry out my judgment. And now we have 1 red and 1 white cube because my verdict was guilty, and I've got 1 matching cube for my verdict. We can carry out a guilty sentence. So this card is then flipped over to its other side, and we would carry out the steps on the top of the card underneath the guillotine for a guilty sentence. In this case, reputation would go up 1, but our court legitimacy would be lowered by 1 space. And then we proceed on to the next card. Any cubes that you've drawn from the bag are returned from the bag. The only exception to that is if we had drawn a blue cube from the judgment pool, as long as court legitimacy is not covering up this top space marked with a W, we would then return the wild token back to the vine over on the left. Now finally, for these momentum cubes, as I said before, you may have some cards that instruct you to add momentum to the bag. However, anytime we find any of these accused people not guilty, we will carry out the judgment on the bottom half of the card underneath the scale or balance, And then we would take any red cubes from the momentum box that are located in the judgment pool and place them back on the board in this box until we have a total of 7 cubes in the momentum area. Now, if all of these cubes were gone, let's say they were all in the bag, the moment we pull the last cube, we would immediately divide this deck into 2 stacks, and then we would begin hearing 2 cases at once. So we would read the text for both of these top cards, and then we would assign a verdict for both of the accused, draw 2 cubes to determine whether or not they were found guilty or innocent, and then carry out that sentence. Now the sentences for the 2 individuals marked here would basically be the same. However, we can do them in either order. So we can do it starting with either this card or that card, but we need to carry out the full sentences for both. Additionally, if there's ever a point in the game where momentum is returned to the box because we found somebody innocent, pardon them, then we will retrieve the cubes from the draw pool. However, we will continue with 2 decks of accused cards that we listen where we hear 2 cases at once for the remainder of the game. That will not change. And the final thing I want to add is if you're ever instructed to add a momentum cube to the draw pool, but there are none remaining in the box, for each cube you cannot add, you will lower the court legitimacy 1 space. So that can cause legitimacy to fall very, very fast if there are not sufficient cubes to be added from momentum. So you want to be very careful about that. And that's how you play The Gods Will Have Blood.